So everyone, nice to meet you all. I am very excited to talk to you today. The topic I want to cover is central to my product management style and my successes running the certifications product at Pluralsight. I'm going to talk about the impact of helping your cross-functional partners embrace product thinking. My own background is unusual among product managers. I didn't start out as an engineer. I didn't even start out working in tech. I began my career as an artist and entered the tech industry as an account manager. That's where I was inspired to shift my career to product. I went to get an engineering degree at CMU and applied what I learned there at several contract roles before landing at Pluralsight. Along with my nonlinear career journey, I got the chance to work with partners from many different functions and many subject matter experts along the way. I made a habit of learning as much as I can from my partners. Even though I learned a lot from them, I'm still never going to be the biggest expert in the room, but I don't have to map out the entire problem space or imagine the whole solution all by myself. Instead, I rely on my product team's expertise and my partners to use what I know to get them to think about what's possible. By starting with explaining what I want to learn, I can leverage their expertise to refine my basic questions into successful research strategies. Before diving into specific details, I want to give you an overview of my context. Pluralsight is a learning platform for tech skills used by large enterprise companies. My product at Pluralsight focuses on preparing for industry certification exams. So think about AWS Cloud Practitioner or Microsoft Azure Administrator. Because this is a space that encompasses the entire tech industry, there is far too much for one person to know. I have an extensive network of partners that I work with to build a certification prep experience that is fit for purpose. Aside from the software engineers and UX designers who bring the product to life, I partner with SMEs across technology domains to curate certification prep content, machine learning engineers to serve machine recommended content to learners, and a taxonomist to keep it all straight. I just noticed that I should, okay, continue. And then of course, there's like the 500K learners who are the ones that are very intentional about going through their cert prep journey on Pluralsight. If I relied only on my knowledge to make product decisions that touched on all these domains, then I would have a very hard time being confident that I was building the right thing. I wanted my cross-functional partners to bring their entire skill set to the table rather than just doing the tasks that I assigned them. So instead of trying to solve the problem in a silo, I reached out in the very beginning of my discovery process. By giving them visibility into the product's goals and empowering them to feel ownership, we were able to make better and faster decisions together. The first step towards achieving a functional, inclusive process is to get all your stakeholders looking in the same direction. So when I first started at Pluralsight, the first thing I did was run a workshop for my stakeholders to share what problems they think we should be solving. They could see for themselves how their priorities align with everyone else's, and it turns out that they are actually different facets of the same problem. I ran the same workshop for content producers, product team members, and machine learning engineers. And what I found was that each team was struggling alone with one piece of the puzzle. Like the content team didn't think learners could find that we have up-to-date content, or like they didn't know that we had fresh content because they couldn't find it on the platform. And they couldn't find it on the platform because we didn't have the right tags to describe the content so that it would appear in search results. And we didn't have the right tags because we didn't know how to define certification content types. So thanks to this exercise, we were able to get a rich understanding of the problem. People could see that it was a huge pain point, but also that it was solvable, and solving it would benefit their own teams a lot. The next step is to dig deeper into the problem, identify all the questions the group still had about it, and create a strategy for getting better answers by breaking the questions up into areas of ownership. Sharing the context of the greater problem alongside the questions will give you much better answers than asking them in isolation. Knowing the full value of answering the questions also helps justify spending subject matter experts' valuable time and the org's very finite budget on experimentation. So rather than repeating what everyone knows, they can validate that knowledge with real customers, real data, or real technology. For example, the reason we wanted to improve discoverability of the cert content was because we thought learners didn't know enough about the certification landscape to search directly for the exam they needed next in their journey. We wanted to provide them with that knowledge, but we didn't know what the best way to organize that information would be. And we also didn't know how to help learners explore that information so that they could quickly find what they care about or what data schema would allow us to support that experience. So by giving each team the full context of the problem and then establishing a shared understanding of our goal, they could explore freely in their own domains. Instead of spending all my time coordinating the teams around one big comprehensive prototype, I helped them create individual, scrappily made prototypes that could iterate and evolve quickly. So the design team was testing interaction patterns on a map, and I was testing with the subject matter experts to understand how they would group information. And engineers were testing how we should nest data within the experience. With the prototypes in hand, leverage all the partners that you have, because the more feedback you get from different points of view, the more intentional you can be about making trade-offs while developing the product. Test with users, as you always should, but know that your circle of feedback is actually much wider than the users you have access to. For example, I knew from talking to the taxonomist that a solid information architecture is important for learners to be able to find the relevant certifications. But I also knew that if we built a robust IA upfront, it would be very costly for our developers. And also the IA might change, since at that point we were acquiring a new company soon. And with that always comes with new data structures and content types that we need to consider. So as a team, we decided to hard code the IA, basically fake it in the UI layer and use that to define the point of view for where we do want to go as a product. Building many small prototypes, socializing them with different partners ahead of time of the release expedited our product development process and helped us release a well-received product in 3 months. When you invite your partners into your decision-making process, your actions are sending the message that you value their point of view. And when people feel valued, they invest in you. And they invest in your product and your problem space, and think about the overall goal instead of just the questions that you bring to them directly. I think that nobody wants to invest in something that they don't feel like they own. Your partners can either feel like they are tenants in a rental on a month-to-month lease, or they can feel like they're homeowners who will be there for years. Only the second feeling will be the one that can get them to spend more effort than the bare minimum. So that's basically all I got for you today. We are only halfway through the time that I'm supposed to be here for. So if people have questions or want to see experiences that I referenced on the platform, I could also do a little demo there. But yeah, that's all I have prepared for today.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Really great to hear some of the conversation on that side. We'll open things up for Q&A a little early, maybe on this side. If anybody has any questions they want to ask in the meantime, maybe I'll jump in with a couple first ones that I've got maybe on that side. You talked about the activity of like facilitating the discussion between partners and yourself as a product manager. Tell me a little bit about how that actually gets done. Is it you taking on that complete ownership? Is it them taking that on, or is it more like a co-owned kind of activity that you participate in on that side?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think this is probably the right slide to talk about this. So I was the facilitator in that I wanted to ensure that we were using the limited time that we had effectively to talk through, to be able to first identify them and then group them by priority, and then get clarification around the group, what they meant when they were saying that, okay, I think this is a problem on the platform. My role as facilitator meant that I was asking clarifying questions. I was forcing decision-making sometimes among my peers. So saying that, hey, okay, but within these two very high impact and high priority and also high effort ones, as you can, this is a very small screen. Maybe let me see if I can actually even pull up the board that I use. But within all of these very important ones, why is it that they're the most important? So I just found the actual lucid board that I use. Everyone wants to think the issues that they thought of are the most important and the highest effort, but like, how do we force them to decide which one is it? And once I force alignment, people don't like to go back on their words. So they stick to it. And then I remind them, I document what we decided as the highest important issues. And then from there, I'm like, okay, so who can be responsible for helping us unpack this hypothesis?
Right, gotcha. That's really great. No, this is cool. So maybe this kind of feeds into maybe the next question from Bianca. It's like knowing a little bit more about these 3 sessions. Maybe you want to dive a little deeper and show a little bit behind the scenes, if you don't mind.
Yep. So basically, let me just zoom out a little bit. I have 3 boards here and they look very chaotic, and as they should by the end of the session, because if everyone's too polite to be comfortable to voice their thoughts, then I guarantee you the session is not productive. So I would say that in the beginning, I set the format. I'll be like, okay, so first of all, what are your goals? And then I coach them. I'm like, okay, so what are the goals? And at that point, as an organization, everyone had a different narrative for why certification matter and why we can't deliver that for our customers. Once they identify the goals that they have, I force them to bucket it under most important, important, and then less important. And then from there, we like talk through each of these sticky notes. So whoever puts it in here, I have them explain it, and then the group helps group them together. So all of these are about making Pluralsight look like the leader within the space. And then I have them write an hypothesis, kind of coach them through what is a goal and how do you write a good hypothesis, and then kind of just let them run with it. So like, what are some, what can we do to achieve that goal? You see these sticky notes, they're a bit messy here because people were voting with the little stars. Yeah. And these are hypotheses that they think are most provable through data or through qualitative user testing. And then from there, we take the ones with stars into this 4x4, where we circle the ones that, yes, this would if we could only do 2 things in this quarter, we should at least start to unpack the few sticky notes here.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's really cool. And so really from a facilitation perspective, you kind of largely led this as far as like laying the groundwork, but really the team did the actual effort work predominantly to help you get the information that you needed out of that. That's super, super great. Kind of curious, I guess maybe on one of the other questions that we've got here, what are some of the ways to encourage ownership with your team members? Additionally, when you feel mistrust towards a fellow coworker, how do you balance giving them the feeling of ownership?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say the easiest way to get to ownership is to make them own a prototype that would answer a question. So this is one of the sticky notes that came out of the workshop. And then from here, as a group, I'm like, okay, but do we really know what we're dealing with? And if we don't, what are all the sub questions that we have? And then I asked the team, so who is best positioned to answer this question? And everyone, of course, belongs to a functional team. So then once we define that, then that becomes the sub question that they own. And since they have ownership of this question, I leave it up to them how they can answer that question. Usually it's through a prototype or like a set of qualitative interviews. And then we come together and be like, okay, do we think through the prototype that you built, does it answer the question? And if it doesn't, how can we rebuild that so that, and also prototypes don't have to all be through like a program that you write. It could be through Excel. You could even draw it if you're trying to test the workflow. I think that the most important part of ownership is feeling like you can do what it takes to answer the sub question that you are responsible for.
Oh, that's really, really cool. I love the analogy of tenants and homeowners that you talked about earlier. And I know a lot of times, like to your point, these folks that are involved in these kinds of activities don't feel like they're, truly part of it and truly able to kind of lean in and give their best. Curious on maybe the tactics that you've deployed to kind of break down some of those barriers between those customer-facing teams, your product organization, some of the different parts of the product team, like design and engineering, which are very common partners in that. Just any kind of the techniques that maybe have kind of ridden out on that side for you. Well,
yeah. So I would say that once we align on what questions we're solving for, and then I tell them, okay, how do you think we should solve this question? I think a lot of the times, because product managers are responsible for strategy, a lot of times people make the assumption that they also know what are all the hows, or what are the best hows to execute that strategy. But actually, I think that is a false assumption, because you are not the most expert engineer. You're also not the most expert designer. In fact, I often play the junior designer or the junior engineer on the team, and that I ask the basic questions. And by forcing people to brainstorm what are all the ways they can own the question that they're supposed to answer, because then I'll just be like, okay, like, why don't we try that? Tell me how we can get started here. Depending on who I'm working with. So if I'm working on organizing the information with a taxonomist, I might invite like a developer from the team to sit in so that they can see how their prototype, where they're testing how to nest data within the experience, is related to how a taxonomist is thinking about information architecture. And then if I'm testing with a learner, how different interactions on a map could reveal more information beyond the screen that they're on, I might invite like a domain leader into that user testing session, and also a developer to be like, hey, look, what are some risks that we can already identify, even though this is like not necessarily the prototype you're running, but then it's related to the question that you're trying to answer. So that's kind of how I break silos, but then also make clear that, you know, the product is the sum of answering all the sub questions rather than one big question of how do we improve discovery for certifications.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really, really cool. Yeah, it's so important, so critical. I mean, these are like, I guess, one of the biggest challenges that we kind of see in a lot of the product teams is that ability to kind of cooperate cross-functionally effectively. But in particular, I think what stood out for me in some of your answers today is in how you take a very active listening approach to this and give your participants a lot of space to find their way into this program in the way that's best for them. And in a way that feels like their contributions again are being heard and being listened to. And I think that's a super powerful moment to take away from some of the stuff that you shared on that side. I see that we've got one other question here. Maybe I missed this, but can you explain a little about what is the workshop you're talking about? Who's involved? Is it like a grooming session? We're bringing in tickets to brainstorm best solutions to a problem, maybe something else. So maybe you want to share a little bit of details on that side.
I think it's the workshop is it this one that I was sharing my screen for earlier? It's so I suppose there's like different types of workshops you can run. It depends on what stage of the discovery process. In the beginning stages of the discovery process, it's good to align on what the goals are from all the cross-functional teams, and then what their hypotheses are, and then you prioritize it. But then I think when it gets to, for example, if you're trying to run a workshop with a stakeholder from your customer's end, then the workshop should be very different. It should also have the same goal as your stakeholders that are internal, and that it should force prioritization. So another workshop that I run a lot with customers, especially if they are the managers of the learners that are actively learning on Pluralsight, is I might do like an interview call with them to identify, okay, how do they measure the success of their job where my product is concerned, so certifications. And then based on what they say their motivations are, I'll create sticky notes for them and then have them put it on this linear math thing where I'm like, can you please prioritize it for me? And then also tell me a bit more about what's missing. Basically, whatever the customer puts in the top half of the workshop is already my qualitative proof that that is the problem space that the team should be working towards.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's interesting because I think you bring a lot of different workshop techniques to this too. And I think sometimes people struggle to pick like, what is the best way to do this? And what's the best way to get started? And sometimes maybe to your point, it's just to get started, just to put that out there and have the conversation, and you can adjust the path as you go if you find out it's not working, or try different techniques. And there are different ways that sometimes work for different people. So it's kind of an interesting takeaway on that side. I think we got time for like maybe one last question, and then we can switch over maybe to our next presenter on that side. How do you get your stakeholders, again, all kinds of different roles here, to participate and contribute in your discovery workshops? Usually they feel discovery is a strictly product thing.
Well, so when I started my role, I didn't know anything about certifications as a problem space. And I think what really helps or like urges people to think about discovery as not just the product manager's job is by highlighting why you think they have knowledge that you can benefit from. So I always stress, like, when I first approach the subject matter experts, I'm like, look, you have 20 years of experience creating certification prep for learners. And I want to make sure that the product that I create is the best experience that can wrap around your expertise. So I want to help make your work more prominent within the platform. I think in stressing how they can contribute to your knowledge base that then drives the product strategy. And then by showing that you are here to listen, as Scott, you mentioned earlier, like show that you're here to listen, show that you're here to learn about their problem solving framework, or like what are some of the issues that they can't solve themselves, is a way to get them to feel like they can contribute. And also, I think as a PM, the job is to drive clarity when the team has a lot of ambiguity around what to do. And your stakeholders might not be able to articulate very clearly what they want out of the product is, but they will definitely be able to tell you what they know, and maybe like, oh, but, or you can push them, right? You can say, what is it about content freshness? Like what does freshness mean to you? And with that, you can help them articulate what they need. And then from that, you can say, okay, but this is more important than that. And then you can make intentional trade-offs when you actually build the prototypes.
Yeah, no, that's great. Love the application of the novice mind there, and just pure curiosity. That's really, really great. Thanks for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge here today. I think really appreciate it. As I mentioned earlier, we do have post-event conversations on the product makers community. If anybody has any questions that we're unable to get answered today, feel free to head over there and ask your question. We'll also get Eileen to share her presentation there later on. Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And as a reminder too, if you found today helpful, we also have another great event coming up in October on how to run product at scale, which is our Product Excellence Summit here at Product Board, and encourage you to check that out as well. There's information as well on the product makers community for that.